Hey everyone, welcome back to another Rest, Eat, Move podcast. I got the big fella in the studio again. We're doing part 2 of Lifespan, Healthspan. We discussed kind of coming back for this, going deeper into what can we do to age well. So I'm going to actually call this Vibrant Aging, basing it off of our conversation around lifespan and healthspan. And so let's just kind of have a recap of part 1. Chronological age is the age when people are born. So a lot of people get so caught up into that number, but chronological age, like we discussed, is not a great predictor of health. That's your biological age. And so biological age is what we have control over, talking about lifespan versus health span. Just because you're living to 80 doesn't mean that you have the health of what an 80-year-old should have. So today we're going to talk about how do we age with grace and have that health span over the years. And so, Dad, welcome back to your favorite topic as we're moving into your birthday next month. Let's talk about vibrant aging.
Had to come up, I turned 67 in a few more weeks. So I think what you kind of mentioned at the very beginning is that what's the definition of, I think most people, and again, we were talking about this in the last podcast, but, I'm 13 years away from 80, but define what 80 is. And I don't look at 80 the same way, obviously, I did probably when I was 20. I used to think, you're old as dust if you were 80. But then if you looked at, we talked about Dan Buettner and the Blue Zones and, the guy riding a horse, at 102, 103. That guy doesn't anything like our definition of 80, 90, or 100. So I think that's the first thing is, when people have these beliefs about aging and what is that's just a number.
Yeah, so maybe it's a good idea to visualize what you think 80 should be or could be versus what you've seen. I don't think that's the one time where maybe we don't want to take past unless there's a good example. If your examples of 80 aren't great, we got to reframe it, paint a new picture.
And I think it's the same way in a lot of different things. It's you see what's possible. I mean, the Olympics was just passed, and you're like, oh, wow, that's incredible. And then they had the Paralympics and the guys swimming with no arms. And you're like, well, that's possible. And so you start thinking about this. And when you think about aging, it really is nice to surround yourself with people that might be older or younger or whatever, but their vibrancy, their juice, their enthusiasm for life is different. And I think that's really, because if you're hanging around with a bunch of people that think, doom and gloom, once they hit 65 or 70, it's like, okay, I can't do that anymore, or what?
Packing it
up, and versus let's not pack it up. Let's see what we can do. And again, as we talked in the last podcast, everybody's aging, but I think it's a mindset, it's a belief that, I've talked about that with my contemporaries, that we think differently about it. We don't really think, oh gosh, I'm getting older. No, it's like, what else? What's new? What's the growth? How can we get better? And I think that's what's exciting.
Yeah, so for people born today, over 50% will live to 100. Epigenetics is a new science in the field of biology that states that our behavior can control or influence our genetics. So there's a lot more, in our court, in our control than I think ever. And I think we're still at the tip of the iceberg for a lot of those things. So what do you want the aging process to look like is going to be step 1 today as we're thinking about vibrant aging. If you want the aging process to be a thing that defines you, like talking about your procedures and ailments and doctor visits, and we've all had relatives that do that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anyone that really hasn't had a relative that defines themselves with their conditions or their procedures, but there is a different way.
Let's step back just for a second. You just touched on epigenetics, and I think the listeners, the viewers, might not be familiar with that term, but one of the best books, you and I have wrote is called Biology of Beliefs, and it's written by...
I didn't write it, but we read it.
We read it.
Yeah.
Did I say we wrote it? No.
I couldn't write that one.
Bruce Lipton wrote that book, but he was a scientist and basically was studying once they got the different microscopes, but how the cell itself influences, your genetics. So we're not doomed and gloom.
Yeah, the environment that the cells are in
Influences the genetics. So again, back to the environment, and he says that in the book, it's environment stupid because the environment will influence, and that's the epigenetics. And that's what's exciting for people, that you might have good, bad, or indifferent genetics, because we all have it. And we might feel like I'm doomed because I have poor genetics. But genetics in this science of that is only about 15, give or take 15%, give or take a percentage point. 85% is your behavior. And I think that's what people start to have to, again, that's another belief, like, oh, I'm just doomed. I've had heart disease in my family, or I have cancer in my family. Yeah, we get it. But if 85% is in my control, wow, that gives you a lot of hope and excitement.
Yeah, unfortunately, 99% of the money goes to the 15%, though.
Correct.
So you're going to hear about the genetics. You're going to talk about the genetic testing, the commercials that get your 23andMe and genetic food, prescriptions and all the things that are coming out there. But think about it, 99% of the money is for the 15% of the control. So 85% is kind of the Wild West, in the sense of, that's why you're going to see a huge, I think in the next 20 years, you're going to see this aging gap that we've talked about continuing to increase, because for the folks that want to kind of buckle up and play the offense, they're going to age with vibrant aging.
And you said this in the last podcast, that we're starting earlier. And so we're starting to pay attention to this earlier versus just kind of at the end, like, okay, I need to change. No, the lifestyles are, can be better or worse at an early age, which allows you to see what that runway could look like. And I think that's what's exciting for people, is like, what is that runway? And again, I think Dan Buettner's in the Blue Zones really has outlined that certain parts of the world has nothing to do with genetics, has everything to do with environment.
Yeah, unlike money, it's really hard to retire if you don't save. But the human body actually can recover pretty quickly, but it is better if we can get ahead of it.
And then many people are using their financial resources, a lot of that, at the end of their life, because they're so unhealthy.
There you go. Yeah. So again, we're gonna spend that 1% on the 85, which to me is a great ratio. What if you could spend 1% of your resources on something that gives you 85% of your health? So vibrant aging. We have 10 or so tips here that we'll take you through on how do we age vibrantly. Maybe you're a great person to talk about this as you're 13 years away from 80. How do we do this with grace and vibrancy? Let's start with breathing. And you've talked about this many times, of our breath, our lung capacity is one of the greatest indicators of longevity. I don't think a lot of people think about that. I think we just kind of assume that as you age, you can't climb the stairs as well, you get winded, can't carry furniture, bring over your grandkids to help you move stuff. Why is breathing so important, and what can you do to kind of control this lung capacity?
Well, we mentioned it in their last podcast, but a couple podcasts before, we talked about in the cardio 1 and 2, the greatest predictor of longevity is VO2 max. And all basically that is your body's ability to use oxygen. And as we age, if you looked at an aging chart, the thing that ages fastest on most human beings is called lung function or lung capacity. And the real big reason is we lose the strength of the diaphragm. And so we start breathing through the mouth too often. We're not using the nasal passages anymore. We're the chest breathers. We're not diaphragmatic or belly breathers. And so that gets weak.
Core's weak, diaphragm's
Core's weak. And so the amount of breaths we take per minute starts to go up. The average in the United States today is around 20 to 22 breaths per minute, which is very unhealthy. And I can, people, Dr. Phil Nuremberger, so many people, yoga instructors, musicians, if you teach people to breathe better, then their efficiency gets better. And now they're doing the 12 to 14 breaths per minute, average, 24/7, because they're practicing it. Now it's so much easier on your cardiovascular system, the heart, the lungs, everything.
It's like blowing up a balloon. It's probably a good exercise to continue to do to kind of keep that self-awareness.
And I think blowing up a balloon, it shows you instantly how the strength of your diaphragm. And again, no matter where you are, if you're a chest breather, you can easily learn how to become a diaphragmatic, nasal, slow breather. So breathing is a big deal. And again, we don't practice it. Like you said, many people are not even aware of it. That's one of the tests we do when we have people come in. I have a group coming in on Monday, and one of the things I'll test them right away is how many breaths do you take per minute, and most people don't have any clue.
Yeah, and it is connected with cardio, but the thing that it's not connected with is, let's just say you are 80 and your joints are maybe not what they used to be, and so to maybe test your lung function is harder, but blowing up a balloon or climbing a flight of stairs at a steady pace, these are some things that you can kind of realize, oh wow, I've decreased or I haven't decreased and I still can function.
Well, if I was just say a primary care doctor, I would do a spirometer test at 20.
There's still time.
And if I was no, I'm good. I'm a prevention guy.
Okay.
So if you looked at, but why don't we do that at the beginning? Like, do a spirometer test, you're 20, 30, 40, every year, every time.
What are you going to do for them?
What's that?
Let's just say it comes back not very good results. What are you going to do?
You're going to create this awareness that, hey.
Yeah, but they don't. That's not a right off of thing. There's no pill or.
No, there's no money in it.
Give them an inhaler.
No, we're going to start right from the very beginning. I had a gentleman this past week. He has all these lung issues, and we're working on.
It's kind of like a tire pressure gauge, right?
Yeah.
So you're seeing how much
you can see it.
When Grandpa had his open heart surgery, he had to blow into that, and
right. And they only get into the spirometer
the doctor
test.
came back and said he's got the
heart unless you have emphysema or you have an asthma or whatever. But why aren't we doing that as a gauge to say, hey,
I think it's a great gauge.
At 30, you should have it's no different than testosterone for both men and women or blood pressure or whatever. Why don't we do that?
We'd say this: breathing is your most powerful tool, yet it's not going to get it's not part of modern medicine.
And we talk about mental health. There's nothing better to calm the nervous system than and quiet the mind and learning how to do.
So breathing's a big deal. How do we get closer to 12 to 14 breaths? It's a big one. How about sleep? Getting 8 hours of quality sleep. I would say, you've said this many times. You experience this. We've all experienced phases of this, but sleeping less than 8 hours, sleeping less than 6 hours is the fastest way to age the human body. All your buddies at Butternut Bread and Frito-Lay aren't alive. So it's not even about aging vibrantly. It's about, in that case, they're not going to even get to that chronological age.
Yeah, I mean, they don't even do in warfare anymore. They don't do sleep deprivation. It's too cruel. So
what's interesting is I do a lot with the police, and the average law enforcement officer lives 13 years less than the average civilian. And when you think about law enforcement officer, and most of them had to do a night shift. And the money's better in the night shift. The control of schedule is better, and so there's a lot of incentives to do that. And so you start to realize the sleep patterns are just horrible. And not to mention the stress and the things they see and the demand of. So we know the research is so out there that sleep is probably one of the best investments you can make. Cancer prevention, quality of life, brain, whether it's preventing Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's. But what's your stance at 67 years old? Is it possible to sleep 8 hours?
Well, as human beings generally get older, they feel like they don't require as much sleep, and that's not true. And so, again, if I have
is that because of the pattern or the habit of not getting 8 hours?
I think. Well, I'll just use myself as an example. It's more difficult to sleep than it was when I was 25. So your hormones are differently. It's just different. So it's more challenging. But at the same time, I think breath, if you can get people to understand the breath, how that leads into better sleep and all the other stuff that goes with sleep. But I have to change the mindset with many people, especially as they get older, that no, I only need 5 hours of sleep. No, if you want to be healthy and live longer and be more vibrant, you have to change the mindset that we need to get closer to 8 hours.
What about people like Mark Wahlberg, who wakes up at 2:30 to work out, 4 o'clock? You got these influencers at the 4 a.m. club.
Well,
what is that doing for them long-term aging-wise?
Well, it's breaking them down. I mean, you did a series years ago, a little video. I think it was a handful of years ago, but you had LeBron James. In fact, they had the starting 5 now on Netflix, and they have a handful of and LeBron's, and you see what he does, and a big part of what he does is the sleep. Or Usain Bolt, sleeps 12 hours a night. So your peak performers that need that physicality, they need everything with it. They understand that's the secret weapon. Now, many people believe, Mark Wahlberg or whoever, they believe their secret weapon is not sleeping.
They think it's time.
It's time is their secret weapon. When reality is, what are you going to do with your time? You talked about this incapacity. It's not more time, it's more energy. So if I'm sleeping, I'm going to have much more energy. I'm going to be much more productive. We've all done this before. We get up super early and we got a lot of time. I'm no good after a period of time. On top of the health, hormones and myelin sheath in the brain, and the list goes on. But that is a belief that people.
And lions sleep 20 hours a night. So.
Yeah, I mean giraffes. We talk about that. Every being on the planet sleeps, and some sleep more than others, but we all sleep. So again, that is another belief. As human beings, before the light bulb was invented, we were sleeping 10 hours plus. 1879. It wasn't that long ago.
And I think, the more I've thought about it, and I'm not a sleep researcher, but who was the guy that studies what kind of sleeper you are?
Yeah, there. Matthew Walker.
But what is it called? What is that?
The chronotype.
Chronotype. The more I've thought about that, I truly believe sometimes in science, and we're seeing a lot of this right now in our society, is we want to put a name, a condition, a tag. I truly think human beings are designed to sleep. And they're designed to sleep closer to this 8-hour marker. Now, sure, people have evolved and adapted, and there's different personalities and energy types and all these things. And you probably have met someone that sleeps 2-3 hours a night, and they have vibrant energy. I think the mistake we make, though, is what's going to happen with your health span at 80. Or 90, or 100. Well, why is Alzheimer's at an all-time high?
Yeah,
Dementia,
and again,
Parkinson's, MS.
Why do we have all these neural problems? But you hit it a while back on the whole time, space, pace. If you were living back where you didn't have the electric light bulb, you don't have a sleep epidemic.
And you might have people that, like Albert Einstein, that's so... their brain is so wired, but he doesn't live that long.
But that's an outlier.
But again, that's
and they don't live long. Yeah. So again, no matter where you are, like I always tell people, and
Abraham
you do the same.
Lincoln obviously was assassinated. He wasn't living long, but I mean, look at him. The guy was like 40 years old, look 100.
Right. So you think about the presidencies, and again, the stress levels and everything else, but they're probably not great sleepers. So I think, again, no matter if you're sleeping 6 hours, you don't have to jump to 8, but the goal is to, maybe I can go to 6.5 or 7. But when we're left, this, we go up to northern Michigan at Douglas Lake. I have no problem sleeping. I open the windows up.
Hadley
it's cool.
has to wake you up.
Hadley wakes me up. So you just have to step back, but sleep is really important.
Well, I'm going to jump one. I'm going to go, not jump one, but pace of life. So slow down and give yourself some space. It kind of goes hand in hand with sleep. I see a lot of people struggling to sleep right now because they don't give themselves any space to anticipate for that sleep. So let's just say you have kids and they got soccer practice and homework, and you're eating late and you're running through the drive-thru and you're overscheduled and blah, blah, blah. And next thing you know, you're exhausted, got to get things done, and you hit the pillow and maybe you fall asleep, and then you wake up and your adrenaline's so high, you haven't finished what you really needed to finish, and so you're stressed out. And we're seeing this over and over and over again. And there's things you can do. The Epsom salt baths we talk about, and I talk about 30 minutes before you go to bed and 30 minutes after you wake up. Try not to look at your phone. But I don't think we're slowing down enough to give ourselves enough space. And so I kind of frame it this way. Let's just say you want to go real fast and give yourself no space. This is an exact equation, and you got 50 years. You got 50 years. You go as fast as you want, run hard, play hard, but things are going to start crashing at around 50. Or you can say, well, what if I slow down a little bit? Not half the pace, but just a little bit. Let's just say I slow down 80% to 80% from the pace, and then you can live to 100. Those are decisions we get to make, and we've both met people that just want to go as hard as they possibly can, and hopefully it's a quick end.
Well, again, I had a CEO group last year, and it was interesting that the last few hours of the present, I had them for the whole day, and they came back and they said, we talked at lunch. We want you to take us through a pace in space, because it hit them in the forehead. And I said, everybody's in a different season. So number one, recognize the season. Right now, you and Holly are in a different season. Kristen and Sean are in a different season. Mom and I are in a different season. So you have to recognize that, number one. And number two, you start saying, do you like the pace of your life? And many people I never really thought about it. But if you don't really like the pace of your life, do you have enough space in your life to handle the pace? And now we start working on schedules. Like you said, you don't have to be crazy with it, but every human being needs rest and rejuvenation. We need to be young again. And if you looked at the springtime and the fall, and we just naturally have these seasons that they kind of rejuvenate each other. And so I think that's the thing we have to just step back and say, okay, if I don't have enough, like when I worked at Butternut Bread, my pace in my life was insane. I was running for 12 to 14 hours every day with no sleep. I mean, I did that for 1 year. If I did that for 10 years, I would have been a train wreck. What I'd done for 2 years. It took me almost a year to get my sleep cycle back after only working there a year. It took me almost a full year in my prime of my physical life. So I think that's what we have to really step back and say, hey.
You would have found energy drinks and cigarettes. You'd have been fine.
Yeah, they didn't have energy drinks back then. But again, I think people have to recognize, do they have enough time in their life? Do they like the space they have in their life? Do they like the pace of their life? And I think that's something to really recognize. And then when we do get that, and we do it consistently, like you said, a massage, an Epsom salt bath, maybe a morning off, whatever it is, you feel. I always tell my clients, if you were looking at your schedule on a Tuesday night and you didn't have to come into work until, let's say, 10 or 11, how would you feel?
Yeah. Yeah, and that expands your capacity. So I think pace is a big deal. I think water is something, you've heard us talk about it, but the key with water is it does two things. It's going to help energize. It's going to help renew the body, because it's carrying and transporting nutrients, and it's flushing toxins. But the big one is it's going to flush toxins. It's going to give us energy. It's vital. And as we know, many people, as they age, their dehydration just increases.
Well, that's about 95% of most seniors come to the hospital. Emergency rooms are basically dehydration. And when you're dehydrated, the first place the body looks for is your blood. So now your blood volume goes down and your cardiac output goes down, and now my energy is not as good as it should be, on top of all the stuff you just mentioned. So, yeah, hydration is a big deal. And then number two is, the quality of the water. We're not always paying attention to that. Whether it's spring water, artesian water.
Yeah, if you're listening to this and being a part of my kids, purified water is bought so much, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's lack of education. It's kind of the same price.
What's the biggest companies, Pepsi and Coca-Cola?
It's going to be more readily available.
Much easier to
But
consume.
Springer Artesian, if you're not buying Springer Artesian, that's such a simple thing. And you feel, we're probably more sensitive to it, but when I drink Dasani or purified water, I might as well not drink water.
Yeah, it's
sometimes.
Interesting. I played in a golf tournament. We were talking about this with Jeff Breck, and he was talking about, because they just gave us everybody Dasani in the golf cart, and that's all they had in the car.
Probably sponsored by Coke.
Yeah, so, but everybody has to go to the bathroom all the time because it's not it's very difficult to. It's not absorbable.
It's like a magnet, and it goes in there with nothing to it, so it just hooks on.
It's gone. So when we laughed about that, I'm like, but again, it's education. The person driving around the cart has Dasani. If you run out of your own water, that's all you have.
Yeah. So upgrading the water, but staying hydrated
and paying attention to your hydration.
All right, let's talk about fasting and eating less. So we get this question all the time, intermittent fasting. I'll say this, I've said it before. I think the reason why intermittent fasting has a word is because we're chronically in a rush and we don't eat breakfast as a society. And so it caught on and it's like, oh, wait, I don't have to eat breakfast anymore. And that's a health thing.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of people think they're intermittent fasting because they don't eat breakfast, yet they're eating really late and the food quality that they're eating is crummy and they had broken sleep and they have coffee in the morning but they think that they're fasting. What we're talking about is a 12 to 14 overnight fast, which allows that bathtub to let the water completely drain out, all that gook come out, and then it gets rid of the bad cells and it starts to renew the body. That's what a 12 to 14 hour fast, and you can do that pretty much every day based on your schedule. And I find that to be much more impactful but sustainable than a 16 to 18 hour fast.
And you just said the word sustainable. So if you want to fast 14, 16, 18 hours once in a while, I don't think that's any problem. But day in and day out doesn't put a lot of stress in your body to 12 to 14 hours, and it's an incredible way to keep the body clean.
And if you start doing 16 and then all of a sudden you do 8, the body's going to get wacky.
Mm-hmm. And again, you start messing with your, lipase enzymes, fat storing enzymes, you start messing with metabolism. And so, it works initially, start losing weight. But in reality is day in and day out, from an aging standpoint, 12 to 14 hours overnight, incredible health benefits. Because the other thing, too, if you're not eating, as we know, you're starting missing nutrients. So when I shrink my feeding time down, I'm missing nutrients now.
Or people that just eat too clean, you still can miss nutrients. Like,
absolutely.
I'm only having chicken breast and broccoli. Well, you haven't had any fruit.
You're probably low on B vitamins.
Not having any grains.
Yep. You're not going to do anything that helps boost serotonin levels. So that's one of the downsides of having such a short feeding time.
And then it leads to eating less. I think there's tons of research out there that the less you overindulge, or the more, if you overindulge on a regular basis, it's putting a lot of pressure on the body to eliminate. And what are we going to do with these nutrients? At once upon a time, we ate 2,200 calories. Today, we're eating close to 4,500. That's double the
and again,
calories.
As you know, it's a lot has to do with the quality of the calories, not just the calories itself. So we want to make sure if you're eating clean, you're probably not going to eat too many apples. You're not going to eat too many bananas. And that's really where people get sideways, because we all can overeat. But that's a great way to keep the body clean. I always tell my clients, too, is like, walk me through your bowel movement. If you're having bowel movements and they're too large and the list goes on, they're like, you're probably overeating. And we've all done that. So when you have a consistent bowel movement, it's not too much, then your body's kind of right in sync. When you're having too much elimination, then we probably are overdoing it.
And then, it leads to eating to the source, using the food target, going quality over quantity. And then daily movement. I think daily movement for the mind and body is so powerful for vibrant aging.
Step back for a second with the food target. Just so everybody understands, the goal is wherever you're at, carbohydrates, you need carbohydrates for vibrant aging. That's fruits, vegetables, ancient grains, stuff we just talked about, potatoes. But you just make them better. And the same thing with proteins. You don't have to overdo the protein. You can eat meat. You can eat plant, seeds, nuts, that kind of stuff, and then your healthy fats. So all you're going to do with that is just try to make those better and try to get a little bit more variety. And then from there we, move forward.
Yeah, carbohydrates, to me, if you want to age vibrantly, do not cut those out.
You got to have good gut health.
Well, if you want good hair, good skin,
yeah,
energy, mental health. So daily movement, strength training, talk about vibrant aging in these things. How important are they?
Well, movement, again, most of our society, 85%, does not move intentionally. They might have to move here and there, but intentional movement. So our goal is how do you get people to move regularly? It's like compound interest because of what it does for the mind and the body and everything together. So that's a big deal. So getting the mindset of, I don't need to kill myself. I don't need to go to the gym. I just need to move regularly if I want to continue to move. Find activities you like to do, play. And then strength training, which we've talked about, it is the fountain of youth. Body weight squats, learning how to do a modified push-up. But as we age, the biggest thing we want to maintain as we age is our muscle because that's your metabolic engine. And we all will lose muscle slowly over time. But again, I want to be intentional about that, and that's where strength training comes in. That's why we call it the fountain of youth.
Yeah, and I did a restorative session for a company yesterday, and two people have knee issues, and they don't even think about movement as a restorative thing. They might go to physical therapy. They've had the procedures done, but can they do a pigeon? Are they trying to do a pigeon? Are they working on their hips? I was working on their ankles, and people were like, I didn't even realize my ankle bothered me. Well, the doctor never going to tell you that your ankle's really horrible, but your knee is what we need to fix. So they're not putting it together. And then I went to the wrist, and I can't tell you how many people that think they're healthy or know they're not healthy or everywhere in between that can't really do some of the normal function of what you should be able to do with the wrist.
But again, you just said it. They don't know. There's no self-awareness. Can you hang from a bar? We've talked about that forever.
I got to send you this video. I did these monkey bars with these. Let's see if you could do those next time you're up north.
Yeah. So, I mean, the incline, climbing
and the decline.
But again, can you just stand underneath the bar
and hang?
And even maybe with your feet touching the ground initially, can you do that? Can you get off and on the floor
without it completely wrecking your back? Or
can you do that? I mean, I have a lot of clients. There's nothing I can do with them except get them on the table because they're not going to go to the floor. They don't want to go to the floor. They want to try to go to the floor. I kind of encourage them to go to the floor. But again, those are things over time. But these are basic functional movements. Can you do it? We do a hip opener. You have to lift your leg up like you're going over a hurdle. I remember, one of the Netflix, they're talking about one of the basketball players hurt themselves, and they had the trainer had them going over a hurdle, walking. I thought, what a great visual to have them go over that. Many people can't open their hip to do that. So those are all things that create that awareness, and that's just the basic stuff. But if we don't do it, like we had Kristen's, Brooks had his birthday party last weekend in Chicago. He turned 3. And they had it was in a park, and the park was locked. We didn't realize it, but there was one gate that was open. So this fence was 4 feet high. And I could not believe that these 35 to 40-year-olds, parents, had a hell of a time getting over that fence. And I climbed the fence, and they're like, I'm like, I just hit me like they could climb a fence. And they all were looking like, where is the opening? I'm like, well, I don't know where the opening is, but just climb the fence. But it hit me, and then the kids were just climbing over it like, ants. They were just going up and over it and whatever. But those are things I think everybody needs to be more aware of. Can you do some of these basic functional movements that keep you vibrant?
Okay, sunlight.
Well, again, back to if you're trying to get a plant to grow, it's no different than human beings. We need that stimulation in the eyeball, melatonin stimulation, serotonin. Sunlight is everything. I mean, when you think about this sometimes in prisons, they put people in solitary confinement and they don't have to see sunlight. What does that do to the human body? So we need to make sure that I always tell Grammy back in the day, she was trouble sleeping. I said, every day, every morning, you need to get outside. Even if it's not sunny in here in Michigan, you need to look up in the sky.
Or when's the last time you just lay down and looked up at the sky? Just do it.
Yeah, look at the clouds and look at the sun, But we need to get outside, and we need to be part of that sun. And again, some people are really afraid of the sun, but in reality there's lots of things you can do to get out in the sun. But sun is a huge thing from a mental health and physical, emotional health. So that's a big deal.
Attitude, practicing optimism, kindness, gratitude. How important is this for vibrant aging? I mean, we've all seen that story of the grumpier old men that live to 90, 100. But how important is attitude? There's a lot of research around loneliness and all that stuff. Attitude's a big deal.
Well, I think the whole thing on attitude is you get to choose it. And so a lot of people don't really think about it. But if you have an attitude of gratitude every day, we all get stuck in that sometimes. When I'm not feeling my greatest, I step back and go, oh, wait a minute here. What am I whining about? And so I think it's something you get to choose, but we're all around people that create more energy. You want to surround yourself with those people, and they want to surround themselves with you. So I think that's something that
Cheap dark cloud, not
cheap,
very
yeah.
good.
And the other thing too is it's an attraction. People want to be around that energy, and sometimes people don't because you're too positive. But at the same time, I think that's a big deal. And people we all need to surround ourselves with people that have that type of energy. And now it's back to the needing piece. So yeah, attitude of gratitude. It's something we get to choose. I'm guilty of it sometimes, and I just have to catch myself like, hey, I can choose and choose better. What am I grateful for? So that's a big deal.
And then 2 more, laughter. Laughter is the medicine of the soul. Having fun. We talk about play. There's some funny things if you just pay attention.
Well, time disappears when we're laughing. When we're having fun, you're a golfer. When you're out on the golf course and you're having fun and laughing, you're probably playing really good. So there's a lot to that of, being lighthearted, having that laughter, having that belly laugh occasionally. That's just
not
such
being
good
so
medicine.
serious.
Yep. Don't take yourself so serious. So laughter.
Even with the election, it's not. We don't have to be so serious.
Yep.
And then last one, sense of purpose, belonging. Just the fact that you're needed. How important is that?
Well, I think that's the challenge I think we all face sometimes. And have you heard me talk about grandpa sometimes on this? But I think it's everybody. And again, we have to be a little more intentional about reaching out to people and tell them they're needed, because sometimes we kind of forget about that. And I think everybody on the face of the earth wants to feel needed.
And I think most people on the face of the earth are needed by at least one person.
Oh, for sure.
And I talked about, I work with the cops, and I always make a joke that you're needed, but your clientele is not going to tell you that.
Right.
The clientele doesn't want you to be around the corner, but most people, think back at your best teachers, your coaches. It's a really good exercise. I did it a handful of years ago. I wrote an email to some people that were really impactful in my life that I, at the time, whether it was in high school, where you don't tell your coach in high school that they were really important to you.
Sure.
And then you get busy and you don't see them ever again. And why would you? But you could. So many people, I think, are never told they're needed. Let's just say you're a kindergarten teacher, and that kindergartner isn't mature enough to say anything, and by the time they are, they're probably not going to make that effort. Those are some things that I really like to remind people that they're needed by at least one person.
And again, that's a great exercise that's not only good for the people you're sending to, but it's good for you. That you're creating that gratitude but you have to be intentional about that, which kind of leads right into a sense of belonging. That's why communities are so important, especially as we get older. We need to create this community. I have a lot of great friends, but as my mom used to always tell me, a great friend is a present you give yourself. You have to work at it.
Sure.
But as you do that, you create this amazing, I've had friends that, I've had for, 60 years. And that's that sense of belonging. That's the sense of purpose.
But you got to work at it both ways.
You got to work at it both ways, yeah. And then again, but that's a gift that keeps on giving.
A gift that you give yourself.
Yep, it's a present.
Yeah,
you
I
give
actually
yourself.
wrote an email to my high school coach who cut me. I'm pretty sure he didn't think that I really was too fond of him, but it actually was a very important, critical. And at the time, I really I wasn't not fond of him. It was exactly what I needed, but.
Yeah, at the time you weren't putting the effort in, and maybe he did or did not see the potential, but you could go in two different directions. And I think sometimes we need that, positivity. I mean, I remember Danielle talking to me about speaking, and she said, you got a lot of potential, but you're not putting the effort into it. And I thought to myself, well, what are you talking about? But it was probably one of the greater, kicks in the butt that, hey, you have this potential, but you got to put some effort into it. So I think that I think we all need people, that sense of belonging, people that can tell you straight face of what's happening. And when you have that trust factor, I think that's really positive too as you get older. You want to create an environment that you feel safe in, that you can actually be vulnerable. And I think sometimes it's interesting, some of the guys I'm hanging out with, we get together and the vulnerability is unbelievable compared to what it was when we were 25, 30. Everybody's bulletproof. Nobody does it. Now we're all talking about all the challenges we face, which is fantastic.
Well, I think that's a good way to end. So as a part 2, as vibrant aging, lifespan, health span, if you want to have a health span, you want to age well, it's going to require effort. I just can't think of anything that is a bigger gift that we would want to put effort into it. You think of people that love cars. Yeah, cars are great and cool and fun, but there's not a better gift that you can give yourself. And what you'll find, and I think this is really critical, what you'll find is the gift of you taking care of yourself also is a gift that gives to others, because you are needed. And I think connecting those dots is more important than ever. I say that to end all my presentations, is like, you're needed. And so this stuff works every time. And the reason you should want to do this is so you can give what you're
in the end, you just hit it right. It's like, if I'm investing myself, it's not only just for myself, but I can help others.
Well, you got 13 more years till you're 80, and we're going to continue to
probably remind me about that.
vibrant aging over here. So we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.